Welcome into episode 179 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray, flying solo today. This week it's you and me and a ton of updates from Apple. New features, refinements, and of course lots in the way of security fixes. We'll tackle it all on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. Lots of software updates from Apple over the past week and a half, some for specific applications, more for Apple's various operating systems. If you've got a modern or even relatively modern Apple device, there is probably something new for you. On today's show, I'll be tackling some of the new features as well as some of the security fixes. Since this show is produced by Secure Mac, why don't we start with that? iDownload blog says Apple released macOS Catalina 10.15.4 last week. Not a huge update, really. The site calls it small in scale. Included in the update are iCloud Drive folder sharing for the Finder, communication limits for machines or user accounts under screen time control. Time-synced lyrics for Apple Music have made it to the Mac, as have improvements for Safari. Also added, Pro XDR display support, an accessibility tweak for head pointer preferences, a decent amount of stuff for the enterprise, a boatload of bug fixes, and, the part we'll dive into, fixes for 22 security issues. It's worth noting as well, Apple has also released Security Update 2020-002 for both Mojave and High Sierra, addressing the same 22 concerns. Now, we're not going to go over all of them, but the guys at Secure Mac have written up some of the most important fixes. One of the ones that they saw as most important had to do with a memory issue in the Apple Graphics Control Driver. This bug could have let a malicious program execute code with kernel privileges, and we all know how painful that can be. The word kernel is what tips us off to the significance of the vulnerability, according to the guys at Secure Mac. It refers to the code at the core of the operating system. Anything that can interfere with the operation of the kernel or run with kernel permissions is potentially very serious. In fact, the main reason that Apple recently did away with kernel extensions was the potential for security issues. So there is a very good reason to update. And here is another one. Another major bug fix had to do with a problem in the transparency, consent, and control feature that's supposed to protect the Mac user by letting them know what actions are being taken by apps on their system. It's also supposed to keep applications from accessing data on other parts of the system, and it's supposed to help enforce code signing for third-party apps. Supposed to, wasn't necessarily. Before last week's fix, the vulnerability could have let bad guys bypass TCC's code signing checks, letting them do things to your system that they shouldn't be allowed to do. Other fixes in the mix. macOS 10.15.4 fixed problems with Bluetooth for Mac, some of which could have crashed your system, one of which could have allowed code execution with kernel privileges. We all know how painful. There were also some important privacy fixes, including the correction of a bug in FaceTime, which could have let local users view private information. And finally, there was a patch to a vulnerability in call history that could have let a malicious application access your call records. I said, and finally, though again, there were over 20 fixes. So if you're on Catalina, Mojave, or High Sierra, over 20 great security reasons to update. All of those updates are free, and they are all available now through the Mac App Store. While not necessarily more important, updates for iOS and iPadOS are certainly more ubiquitous. iDownload blog says iPadOS 13.4 brought the much talked about mouse and trackpad support to Apple's tablet that had been much talked about. Lots more for both operating systems. Updates highlighted include 9 new Memoji stickers. That means you sitting behind a MacBook, you with angry puffs of steam coming out of your nose, you crossing your arms in an X in front of your body. Lots of really expressive stuff. iCloud Drive folder sharing. That's you deciding who can see a folder, you managing permissions for that folder, and stuff like that. Internet OS recovery. That's you being able to recover a device's firmware without having to physically plug into anything. With this feature, iDownloadBlog says device owners will be able to use a Wi-Fi connection to reset their device and or update it if necessary. They will no longer be required to connect their device to a computer via a cable. Plenty more where that came from, including tweaks to the toolbar in the Mail app, voice-only access to Siri even when the phone is face down, third-party navigation app support for CarPlay, universal purchase support for the App Store, improvements to the keyboard and Apple Arcade, a boatload of bug fixes, and 28 security fixes by my count. Secure Mac tracked 8 separate issues with WebKit, which is basically what powers Safari, as well as all of the browsing done on iOS and iPadOS. These 8 nasties could have resulted in several potentially serious abuses, including code execution, unauthorized access to restricted memory, and other bad things. Again, we are tackling a Bluetooth problem. Before the fix, an attacker might have been able to intercept data being transmitted by Bluetooth in certain cases. More trouble with the kernel addressed. 3 issues for iThings. 2 of these pertain to a problem with the kernel itself, system memory issues, which could have permitted code execution or unauthorized reads of restricted material. The other bug had to do with the IOHID family kernel extension, which helps the operating system manage human interface tools, such as touchscreens, buttons, accelerometers, and so on. The problem, again, was tied to a system memory issue, which could have resulted in code execution with kernel privileges. Now, I came across an interesting update for Safari for iOS, macOS, and I assume iPadOS as well. Another one from iDownloadBlog says, in the new version of Safari for both iOS and macOS, the cookies for cross-site resources are now blocked by default. This will significantly cut down on cross-site tracking. That's bad news for businesses, I'm sure, but good news for user privacy. Again, those are not all of the issues addressed, but those should be plenty. Suitable for iPhone 6s and later, iPad Air 2 and later, iPad Mini 4 and later, and iPod Touch 7th generation. iOS and iPadOS 13.4 are both free. Each is available now through the settings menu on applicable devices. If you've not updated, by golly, don't you think you might wanna? We'll hit 2 more OS updates and their security components in a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. Macs are everywhere. People who years ago thought they weren't real computers or were just overpriced toys, those same people use Macs for everything they do every day, trusting them with important work and with a lot of personal information. As the Mac has grown, so has its status as a target. Bad guys want to steal the information stored on those Macs, but you can guard against that with MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by Secure Mac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for over 20 years. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your computer. Keep your Mac clean with MacScan 3. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by Secure Mac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. 2 more operating system updates about which to tell you, one for something you watch and one for your watch. Apple's current focus on TV is less about features than it is about content. iDownloadBlog says release notes for tvOS 13.4 were sparse, simply saying this update includes general performance and stability improvements. Definitely update anyway, even if you haven't seen stability issues. tvOS 13.4 addresses 18 vulnerabilities, some of which we'll get to in a moment. As for the watch, iDownloadBlog says watchOS 6.2 for Apple Watch added a little bit of newness. The update brought in-app purchases to apps on Apple Watch, fixed an issue where music might stop when going from a Wi-Fi to a Bluetooth connection, and it turned on the ECG app on Series 4 watches or later for Chile, New Zealand, and Turkey. Those countries also got access to irregular heart rhythm notifications, according to the report. And security fixes, of course. 15 of them by my count. Different as each device is from the other, each has a lot of the same stuff going on under the hood. That means a lot of the same vulnerabilities when things are broken, and a lot of the same fixes when things get fixed. You'll be happy to know that watchOS 6.2 and tvOS 13.4 fix a lot of the same kernel bugs that affected iOS and macOS, as well as the WebKit vulnerabilities we talked about earlier. Additionally, both updates have a security patch for icons that could have let a malicious application learn what other applications were running on the device. They're not supposed to do that since that is a potential privacy risk. Similarly, the watchOS update fixed a problem with sandbox restrictions in icons that could have allowed unauthorized disclosure of media files without the proper permissions. Now, if you've listened to this show for a while, if you've heard August and me go through various operating system updates, you know that he and I have a debate. Should you have your devices set to update automatically? I hate to be this guy, but I'm going to say do as I say, not as I do. I do not have my devices set to update automatically, except for my Apple TV. Everything else I update manually. But I'm different than the average Apple user. I mean, my usage is pretty typical, I think. But my job is to pay attention to Apple stuff, including updates and fixes. I'm not saying nothing gets past me, but updates to operating systems don't get past me. If you're not spending hours every day keeping up with Apple News or managing Apple devices, you should probably go ahead and set your devices to update automatically. I know the guys at Secure Mac think so. I know August thinks so probably go ahead and do that. And seriously, if you don't have automatic updates set and haven't applied last week's updates, well, there may be one more thing to consider. Having said everything that I just said about automatic updates, I'm going to give you one very specific reason you might not want to update yet if you haven't. As I was getting ready to record this show, I came across an article on Cult of Mac warning that Apple's latest updates kill FaceTime on older iPhones and iPads. According to the report, the issue affects devices running iOS 13.4 and macOS 10.15.4 when they attempt to connect with devices running iOS 9.3.5 or 9.3.6, or if they're trying to make the calls go in the other way. This seriously couldn't have come at a worse time. A lot of us are keeping in touch with friends and relatives during the COVID-19 self-isolation using the iPhones and iPads we have on hand. For some, this update is throwing a wrench in that. One user hit Twitter saying, since updating my iPhone 11 Pro and iPad Air 2 to 13.4, I can no longer FaceTime an old iPad running iOS 9 one that my elderly grandparents are using during this difficult time. Another message posted to Apple's own forums said, after upgrading my iPad Pro 2018 to iPadOS 13.4, I get stuck on connecting screen when calling my parents, who use iPad 3 running iOS 9.3.5. Cult of Mac goes on to say Apple typically recommends updating to its latest software to fix any issues, but for many iPhone and iPad models still in use, iOS 9.3.5 or 9.3.6 are the last supported versions. The list of devices stuck on these releases includes iPad 2, iPad 3rd generation, iPhone 4S, iPad mini 1st generation, and iPod Touch 5th generation. So all the security stuff I said earlier is true. But if you're keeping social in this time of social distancing with somebody on a much older device, you may not want to upgrade. Or you may want to buy them a new iThing. Or get to know trusted third-party video chat applications. Just another thing to consider. Because you don't have enough of those. Hey, if you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is securemac.com/checklist. There you'll find notes for this show, for the last show that we did, for the shows coming up once they actually are shows that we've already done. You can actually listen to every episode there as well, so it's almost like a read-along. And it all begins in one place, securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you would like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.